So good morning. Today's daf is Ketubot daf Tetvav 15. We are at the bottom of Yudalit Amabet. I'm going to share my screen. Where is it? We're going to still talk. We're still talking about the believability of the woman. So we concluded yesterday with a Mishnah that taught that if a woman was going to get water and something bad happened to her, so Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says that we rely on the status of the majority in the town to determine whether the woman's allowed to still marry a Kohen. If the majority of the town is Jewish and kosher, so then we'll say that she's allowed to marry a Kohen. We're going to assume that that's who it was that did something bad to her. So if, however, and on the other hand, if the majority was not good, so then obviously she would not be allowed to. So now we're going to ask the question. We had in the previous Mishnahs, we had two different opinions. We had Rabbi Yoshua, who always said we assume the worst, and we had Rabbi Gamliel that we said that we trust the woman, because she was certain about what happened. So now we're going to try to align the position in our Mishnah that we just read with one of those two opinions. So Amar le Rav Rav Nachman, the beginning of the Gemara at the bottom of Yudalim and Bed, 5 lines up. So Rabba says to Rav Nachman, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri de Amar Kaman, to whom does Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri agree in our Mishnah? In our Mishnah, it's Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Rabbi Gamliel, Afil Bero Psul Nami Maksher, because it's a problem. Because if in fact he was talking about Rabbi Gamliel, who says we believe her, well, he says that even when there's a majority of men who are not appropriate, will believe her and cause her to be kosher. And Ika Rabbi Yoshua, and if it was like Rabbi Yoshua, Afil Barok Sherim Nami Puzzle. He doesn't. The point is that in our Mishnah focused on the majority of the people that are in the town, but that was never a factor in our previous Mishnayos. So it doesn't seem to align with anybody. So Amar Le, Rav Nachman responds, Hachi Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. This is what Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav as we turn to page Tedvav Amud Aleph. B'koronos shel tzipori, that we're talking about the corners of the wagons of Tzipori. That what happened, Hayamaisa. That was where this happened. So that Rashi explains, b'koronos shel tzipori, b'yom hashuk, in the day of the marketplace, shesios v'shairos b'makom acher ba'osham, because we had groups and caravans coming from other places. And so as a result, what Rashi explains, it was really not just a simple majority, but it was a double majority. It was a majority of two different populations. So the idea is as follows. Maybe, we're gonna see that the majority wins. So the two possible. So first is maybe it was somebody from this town, and even if it was from somebody from this town, it would be okay because a majority is okay. And if you want to say maybe it was somebody from out of this town, well, maybe even if it was somebody from out of this town, the majority of people who were coming to this town from out of this town were also Jewish, and so also it would be okay. So it's a double majority. So that's the idea that we're going to say is why either Rabbi Yoshua or Rabbi Gamliel would be more lenient than they would in other cases. So now we're going at Ukid Rabbi Ami, and it's like Rabbi Ami who says the following: Da Amar Rabbi Ami, V'husha Haisa Sia Shel Bnei Adam Ksherim Overis Lasham. That the story in our Mishnah is when there is a group of people that are passing by and are also a good kosher lineage. And so as a result, whether it was somebody local or somebody foreign, we're doing fine. Ukid Rabbi Yanai. And also Rabbi Yanai made a similar kind of statement, Amar Rabbi Yanai, Niv Elis Bikronos Ksheir L'Chahuna, that it was talking about the wagons that she was, she had relations on the wagons that were kosher for kahuna. Now, what does that mean? She had relations on the wagons. That doesn't make any sense. The corona salka daifut, you merely mean that she had relations on the wagons, as Rashi says in the third line, mashma al hakaron, that specifically the idea was that she was having relations on the wagon. Now that doesn't make any sense. El nivelas b'shas koronos k'sherachuna. What? No, exactly. The wagon's not alive. And so rather it means that at the time that there were wagons in town, that is the majority of the people who came in on those wagons, they were all kosher. And as a result, she will be kosher to marry a Kohen. So aval perish echad mitziporu yaval. However, if in fact we know that one person left Sipori and had relations with her, havlad shtuki, we'll say that the child is a shtuki. And Rashi explains about perish echad mitzipori dinan vaday demin ha'ir haya, that if we know that he was definitely came from the city, well then afal pishat tzipori ishirova mesian l'chahuna, that even though Tzipori has mostly people who, if they had relations with her, will still allow her to marry a Kohen, havlad shtuki dibechad ruva lo machshir, because one majority we're going to say is not enough. So we've qualified our Mishnah to say that our Mishnah is talking about a double majority. And now that we've talked about this double majority, we're going to explain why the double majority works. But before we get there, we have to spend a little bit of time based on a very complicated pair of concepts. The first concept is kol de parish meruba parish. So if I have a whole bunch of marbles here, okay, and we have 10 red marbles and 20 green marbles, and I pick one out, right, and I put it over to here, well then most likely it's going to be a green marble because there are more green marbles than red marbles. And because I separated it, we're going to say kol de parish, the fact that I separated it means that meruba parish, we're going to assume that it came from the majority. So even though even though there are some red marbles, we're going to assume that it came from the green marbles, from the majority. Now, a remarkable thing is going to be the case if we again have the 20 green marbles and the 10 red marbles, and now we remove all but one of the marbles, and so only one marble remains, but it's in its place. Then we have a separate concept of kol kavua kemechza al mechza, that anything that is in its location, we're going to assume is a 50-50 probability. So even if there were 50 green marbles and one red marble, we're going to say that the odds of this being a red marble is 50-50. You cannot assume that it's from the majority because it is in its location. And we'll see shortly the two stories that are going to emphasize that. James doesn't seem to be available today, so we'll see. I'm not sure that he's available. If he right now Hanan is on, but we don't have James at the moment. So if hopefully he'll be able to join, and if he does, I'll let you know. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to explain these two concepts and discuss them. So now that we've got that background, the Gemara quotes the following statement: Kihad debei asa Rav Dimi Amar Zeiri Amar Rabbi Chanina. So it was all said in the name of Rabbi Chanina. But Amrila Amar Zeiri Amar Rabbi Chanina, and some say it was Zeiri in the name of Rabbi Chanina. Holchen achar rov ha'ir ve'ein olchen achar rov si'ah. That we follow the majority of the city, but we don't follow the majority of the visiting group. Now that doesn't really make sense. And the Gemara immediately jumps on it, because if you were to say, again, the two principles are, if you're in your place, you follow 50-50. If you're not in your place, then you follow the majority. Well, which of the groups is not in their place? The people who are traveling or the people who are in their city? the people that are traveling are not in the place. And so the Gemara asks, Klapelaya, I don't understand. The logic seems to be the other way. Hani naire, v'hani kavig v'kaime. The group that is traveling, they're the ones who are moving. And the other group, the people who are in the city, they're the ones who aren't moving. They're the ones who are in a fixed location. So Ella, so we're going to reread that statement. And the statement is, Holchen achar rov ha'ir. We follow the majority of the city, but v'hu de'ika rov siya bahada. That is only when there is a majority of the group visiting also that supports it. So only when you have two positive majorities, then we'll say ein holchen. Then we'll say that we go after the rov. But the ein holchen achar rov ha'ir gredasa. But we won't follow a majority of the city on its own. Below achar rov siya gredasa, and we won't follow majority of the visiting group when it is on its own. So my time, what's the reason? So gzeira rov siya at the rov ha'ir. So our first answer to that question is that why do we need the double majority? Because we're worried that if you do the majority of only the people who are traveling, because you say that the people who are in town, it's a 50-50 because they're in their place. Well, then maybe if we follow the majority of the people who are traveling, we might come to think that it would be okay to follow the majority of the people who are in the town. And so as a result, since we don't want that to happen because of the concept of kol kavua kemekza al mechza, so as a result, we're going to require a double majority. Now that is not the answer we're going to stick with. We are going to find a different answer. So, but before we do that, the Gemara is going to ask a question. V'rov ha'ir nami. But even when you talk about a majority of the people in the city, remember that our case was a woman who goes to the well to get water. Idaka azle inhu legaba. But that means that the man, must have left his home to go to her. And we have the concept of kol de parish meruba parish. So why don't we say that about the man, that he also is considered a man who left his location, and so we can assume that we follow the majority. So lo tricha de ka'azla ihi legabayhu. So it must be that in our Mishnah, that when we're talking about her going out, she is going to a place where he is located. Dahabale kavua. So he himself is going to be stationary, and so as a result, it's going to be more like a case that we'll see of where you go to a store and you don't remember which store you went to. So v'amar Rebbe Zera kol kavua kemekza al mechza dami. And again, since we're going to assume he was in his place, we have a statement of Rebbe Zera that says that whenever the uncertainty is about a thing in its location, we're going to assume it's a 50-50 uncertainty. So umibiina and trey rube. Well, now 1 second. So you're saying that we really need two majorities. But we learned in a brisa, Teisha chanuyos kulan mochros besar shchuta. If you have 9 stores that all sell kosher meat, v'achat mocheret besar nevela, and one sells non-kosher meat, v'lakach me'achas mehen, and you went and you bought some meat from one of the stores. And you don't know from which store you bought it from. What do you think is going to happen, Mark? We don't know which store you bought it from. So we don't know. So we're going to say in that case, even though 9 stores are kosher stores and only 1 store is a non-kosher store, sveiko asur, in that certain situation, because it was in its location, meaning on some level, we expect you to know where you are. So we're going to say that in that situation, the doubt is forbidden. It's a 50-50 doubt. And so as a result, we're not going to follow the majority because there is no majority because we're treating it as 50-50. However, if you in fact just found the piece of meat on the street, which I would not advise you eating. But in any event, if you find that piece of meat on the street, halach akar haro, because now the piece of meat is not being taken out. You are not taking that piece of meat out from the different stores. You are finding it on the street, and so because it's separated, so as a result, you can follow the rove. So v'chitema, so b'she'ein dalsos. So now, why is that a question? That's a question because we don't say that you need a double majority. We don't say that you follow the majority of the world and the location. You just follow the majority of the location. So it seems like a single majority is enough. And if you want to say that actually we're talking about a situation where the doors to the city were not locked, and because the doors to the city were not locked, so as a result, the meat may have come in from anywhere. And let's say that a majority of the meat in the rest of the world also happens to be kosher. And that's the case that we're talking about. But V'ha'amar Rabbi Zera, Afal Pisha Dalzos Medina Neulos. Rabbi Zera says himself that when he says that we can follow the majority, we can follow the majority even if the gates of the city are locked. So we know that the piece of meat came from the city where there is only one majority of being kosher. So as a result, so now the Gemara changes its answer. And before, again, we answered that the reason that we need the double majority is because maybe we'll rely on the single majority of people in the city. Now we're saying, no, that doesn't seem to be the answer, but rather, ma'aleh asu b'yuchsin, that the reason is that we need two majorities in our case, in our Mishnah, is because there we're talking about people's ancestry and their genealogy. And when we're talking about their ancestry and genealogy, we want to be as certain as we can. And just having, even though you have a majority, just having one majority is not sufficient. We need a double majority, and then we'll be more lenient in connection with a Kohen. But with one majority for a Kohen, that won't be sufficient. So that is our explanation. And now we're going to go back and analyze Rabbi Zera's statement of Kol Kavua Kamechza Al Mechza. So
before you do that,
please go ahead.
Just by pure logic, this thing about where it's found does not make any sense, correct?
100%. 100%. Again, it seems to be that when the question is about you being in the right place of the location and having some sense of lack of knowledge, it's almost like a gzeira. It feels to me like a gzeira, that we're going to say, look, you need to know where you're located. You have an obligation to understand your location. And so if the object is in its right location and you still don't remember what it was, well, then we're going to put that on you. We're not going to let you do it. But
so it's like a penalty.
The problem with that, the problem with my read is the next statement, because let's take a look at the next statement, because it says, Gufa, Amar Rabbi Zera Kol Kavua Kamechza Al Mechza Dami Bein Lakula Bein Lachumra. Now, if what I was saying was true, it should only be Lachumra. But we're going to see that it even applies in connection with the stringency. So, it even applies in connection with the leniency. But I that's my best, because I agree with you. It doesn't make any sense otherwise. There's got to be something more that's going on. Okay, so let's take a look. All right, so again, so we say that statement applies whether it's with a stringency or a leniency. So manalei Rabbi Zera, how did Rabbi Zera come up with this rule? So if you want to say that it's from the brisa that we quoted before, when you have 9 kosher stores and 1 non-kosher store, and you go to one of the stores and you don't know which one, so let's read it inside Kulin Mokros Basar Shkuta. You have 9 stores that all sell kosher meat, and then an additional store that sells non-kosher meat. And you went and bought from one of them, and you don't know where you bought it. Sveiko Asur, we say that that's Asur. So that shows that when you take it from its location, it's like matzah and matzah. So ve'ucha nimsa, and then we finish the quote. And if you find it, well, then halach achar harov. There we find you follow the majority. Well, hasam l'chumra. That only tells us that we follow this principle to be machmir. But elam mishisha mitzvah de'im v'sheretz echad b'neihem. Well, maybe we can do it from the situation where there are 9 frogs and 1 creepy crawly rat, and they're all dead. No. So really kind of disgusting. All right, but v'naga be'achamahem, and you touched one of them. I don't advise that. Please do not touch any dead animals. You saw a rat. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Oh, yeah, that is disgusting. Yech is right. So, and you touched one of them, and you don't know which one you touched. Sveiko tameh. In that situation, we're going to say you're tameh. Why? Because even though there are 9 good ones and 1 bad one, we're going to say it's treated like 50-50 bad, and so as a result, we'll follow we'll rule to be strict. Well, hasanami l'chumra, but what's second? That one also is being machmir. So earlier in that brisa about the 9 frogs and 1 rat, now we're going to have the opposite of 9 rats and 1 frog. So element exactly, yeah. So rather say it's 9 of the shratzim and 1 of the frogs. And you touch one of them, and you don't know which one you touch. When it comes to Rishus Hayachid, so we have a general principle that in a private domain, a doubt about Tuma is considered Tameh. Rishus Harabim Sveiko Tahor. But in Rishus Harabim, we'll say that even though it's 50-50, we'll say you are Tahor. So the point is that we see in this instance that even though the things are all in their location and you don't know which one you touched, we're going to treat it as 50-50 and we're going to be lenient. So now the Gemara asks, how do we know this from the Torah? Where do we see this concept in the Torah? And so we're going to quote a halacha from the halachas of murder. So Amar Kra Arav Lo Vikam Alav. That when is it that a person is going to be punished with the death penalty? It is where the person ambushes the person and gets up and tries to hit him. So the idea is that Ad Shius Kabain Lo. The point is that you need some intention of the victim. Okay, that is one opinion. That is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon in the Gemara in Sanhedrin. However, the rabbis disagree, and that's the one that we're going to care about for our purposes. Because what do the rabbis say? V'Rabbanan, Amri debei Rabbi Yanai, Prat lezorek even lego. That what is this pasuk telling us that isn't included in the punishment of murder? It includes the idea of throwing a big rock, which one should never do because big rocks can hurt somebody, and throwing it into a group of people. Now, what kind of group are we talking about? Heichidami, what kind of group? So, if you're talking about 9 non-Jews and 1 Jew, well, then the reason that the person is going to be not liable is because or not liable to the death penalty is because there are 9 non-Jews and only 1 Jew, and so we'll follow the majority, and you don't get the death penalty for killing a non-Jew. So inami palga upalga. And even if you were to say that it was 50-50, safek nefashos lahakel, we have a general principle that an uncertainty in the case of a death penalty case, you are going to be lenient. So lo tzricha deikatishu Yisraelim uktani echad beinehem. So it must be that when you threw that rock into the group, you threw that rock into a group of 9 Jews and 1 non-Jew. Because the Canaanite is in his location, he's not been separated from everybody from some other group. So as a result, we're going to say that they're in their right location. And so if you end up killing somebody, we're going to say that that wasn't your intention to kill a Jew, and therefore we're not going to punish you with the death penalty. And so that's how we see that, in fact, that even this concept of kol kavua kemakza al makza dami, that concept that we saw up above, right? Kol kavua kemakza al makza dami, that concept applies even in a case to be lenient, and even in a death penalty case. So now the Gemara goes
just one question. I mean, getting back, with apologies to Mark, but I mean to the frogs and the rat. But it shouldn't matter if it's in where it is, right? If it's Rishut Rabin, Rishut Dayachid, it doesn't change the odds. It's just it's just the presumptions. The presumptions are different. But I understand. But I mean, it's still strange though, right? Because the facts are the same.
It's because the presumptions are different that we end up with a different result in the 2 locations.
Yeah, but usually the presumption comes first and then the facts. Here you have the facts and then
agreed.
And then you're applying the presumption.
Correct. Most places in the Talmud that we talk about this concept of that if there's Tuma and Tara in a public location, we're going to and we're uncertain about it, we're going to say that it's tahor, and in most situations we're going to say it is in private locations we'll say it's tameh. And it's only that, but here we're apparently saying that there is really 2 concepts, that we're going to first look at the majority, and if we got a majority, so if there's an so they're often, right? Often we're dealing with, we know that there is something that's tameh in this field, but we don't know where it is.
Right.
Here, we're adding essentially a second uncertainty, or a different uncertainty, where we don't know whether the thing is tameh. And so when the question is just about the where, so then in public locations will be in public domains will be lenient, and in private domains we will be strict. But when the question is also about the underlying object, and even when it's only about the underlying object, because in this case we know we touched something,
right? So
then we have 2 evaluations. Evaluation number 1 is we follow is that ordinarily we would follow the majority. But when it's in its right place, we're going to treat everything as 50-50. And so now that we're treating everything as 50-50, if we're in a if the majority is going to be if the majority is going to, I should actually back up 1 step, because if the majority is tameh, well, then we're just going to treat everything as tameh. But when the majority is tahor, then we can go back, then because it's all in its location, we'll go to the 50-50, and because then we're now have 50-50, so now in a public location, we'll follow the lenient position, and in the private location, we'll follow the strict position. So you're absolutely right that we're effectively It's a double layer, and usually we don't even focus on this particular layer. Okay. All right. So now we're going to return to the case of our Mishnah and offer some opinions with respect to the halacha. So Itmar, Rav Chia bar Ashi Amar Rab, halacha Rabbi Yossi, that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. He is the one who said our statement. He said the statement in the name of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, but he said the statement of our Mishnah. And so the fact the halacha is like him, that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri states the accurate halacha. Rav Chanan bar Rava Amar Rav, but we have another statement also in the name of Rav, and where it says Horas Shas Haisa, that it was a ruling just at that moment. And if we take a look at the second to last line in Rashi, Horas Shah Haisa, Hach de Rabbi Yeshua, de Rabbi Yehuda ben Neira, to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, rather, excuse me. After Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Tzorach Shah Haisa, that was just a need at that moment. So, Ro Sham Shar Tzidei Heker, Dvarim, he either saw Lahetir, either he saw some other reason to be lenient, Avalado wrote, but for general purposes, Trey Ruby Be'inan, we would need two majorities. So now we have this question of these two different opinions that seem to be reverses of one another. So Masav Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah challenged Rabbi Chia bar Ashi's explanation. Ulyochzin Lobain and Trey Ruby. Don't we need two majorities? And from the just simple read of our Mishnah, it seems that there was only one majority. V'hatnan, indeed, we learned in a Mishnah. Matzah batinok moshlach. If you find an abandoned child, as we turn to Tedvavam Mebet, Imrov Ovdei Kochavim Ovid Kochavim. If the majority of the people in town are not Jewish, well, then we're going to assume that baby child that we just found is not Jewish. Imrov Yisrael. And if majority of the people are Jewish, well, then we'll assume that this baby is Jewish. Matzah Yisrael. And if it's 50-50, we'll just go to say that he's Jewish. So Amar Rav Lo Shanu El Lahachayoso. And Rav says that is only talking about whether or not we're going to use communal funds to support the child. Aval Yochasin Lo. However, when it comes to lineage, one majority is apparently not enough. We're not going to rely on it. Ushmuel Amar Lefakeach Alav Es Hagal. That when we rely on the fact that he's Jewish, we're talking about and this is how we'll read it at the moment. We'll see that we're going to revise this read of Shmuel, but we're going to understand that when it says that he's Jewish, we're talking about whether or not we will rescue him from under a pile of rocks on Shabbos. So Ishtamite Had Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar. So clearly, the Rabbi Yirmiyah forgot that what Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rab. Because what did he say? The Corona shel Tzipori Havamasa. That the story in our Mishnah was dealing with when there were wagons in Tzipori, meaning that it was a market day and there were people visiting. And so, in fact, when Rav Chia bar Ashi said in the name of Rab that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah, he was talking about where there were two majorities. And so that's not going to be a problem. There were, in fact, two majorities. Well, one second, if there were two majorities, Rav Chanan bar Rava to Amar Horash Shah Haisa Kashyaha. But if there were two majorities, why does Rav Chanan bar Rava say that this was only a ruling for that moment? And because we understood that his ruling was saying that a single majority is not enough, and you need two majorities. So man demasneha lo masneha. So the person, namely Rav Chanan bar Rava, when he was saying that our Mishnah was a ruling for the moment and that really you need two majorities, he was not using the teaching of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav. He did not have that tradition, and so as a result, For him, our Mishnah was about one majority. And so we see that essentially, even though it seemed like originally Rav Chia bar Ashi and Rav Chanan bar Rava were making two separate statements, in fact, we have now shown that we can actually understand them as agreeing. And that in fact, what we're saying is that you need a double majority in cases of lineage. So Gufa. Now, let's go back to that Mishnah that we said that if we find an abandoned child. So matzah batinok mushlach, you find abandoned child. Imrov ovdei kochavim ovdei kochavim imrov Yisrael Yisrael matzah Yisrael. That if you have that we follow the majority, and if it's 50-50, then we'll assume he's Jewish. And Amarav lo shanu el lachio. So we were talking only about helping him stay alive and giving him food. Aval yochsin no low, but not for with respect to confirming his ability to marry anybody. Shmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, "Lefakeyach alav hagal as hagal," that it's only to remove the heap that's on top of him, the stones that are going to be on top of him. Umi Amar Shmuel Hakim. Now that doesn't make any sense. Could Shmuel actually say that the only time we'll desecrate the Shabbos to save this Jew is if the majority of the people in the city are Jewish, or if at least half are Jewish? Because he also says, Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. So it was said by Rav Yosef in the name of Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. Ein holchem b'pikuach nefesh achar harov. You don't require a majority to save someone's life. All you require is a minority. Even in a minority situation, we will violate Shabbos in order to save someone's life. So Ela ki itmarsh de Shmuel aresha imer. So when was Shmuel's statement saying? He was talking about the very beginning of the Mishnah, where it says, Imrova ovdei kochavim, oved kochavim, that if most of the people are idolaters, are not Jewish, we'll treat the person as not Jewish. And Shmuel says about that, Amar Shmuel, that when it comes to rescuing this baby from underneath a pile of rocks, then we will assume that no, even if there's a minority chance of him being Jewish, so then we will rescue him. Now, I will note that we do not, in fact, hold this way today, that this was at a time where the non-Jews were so mean and so terrible to the Jewish people that there was a sense that we could not desecrate Shabbos to save a non-Jew. But today we don't actually pass in that way, and we do say that you can save even a non-Jew by violating Shabbos. So, Imrov ovdei kochavim oved kochavim l'mai hilchasa. Well, in that case, since we're saying that Shmuel is pointing out that when you have a life and death situation, we follow the majority. I mean, we don't follow the majority if they're not Jewish. When do we follow the majority if they're not Jewish? L'mai hilchasa, to what law does that apply? So Amar Rav Papa lahachilo nevelos, that if it comes to feeding this baby, so this baby is now being taken care of by a Jewish family, but since the baby is probably not Jewish, you would be allowed to feed that baby non-kosher stuff, even when the baby gets older and becomes an adult. Imrov Yisrael Yisrael. Now, 1 second. If we say that a majority is Jewish, so Lamai Helchasa, what law does that refer to? So Amar Rav Papa lahachazira lo aveda, that if in fact he loses something, that there's a special mitzvah in the Torah to return a lost object. And while returning a lost object to a non-Jew is a very nice thing to do, when it comes to a Jew, it's a special mitzvah. So matzah al matzah Yisrael, what about the rule about 50-50, treating him as a Jew? Lamai helchasa, what law is that about? So Amarish Lakish, linazakin, when it comes to damages, when it's a 50-50, so then we can be strict, we can say that he's Jewish. Well, Hekidami, what's the story? What's the damages that case that we're talking about? If you're a Jew's ox gores the child's ox, so then lay, then you, the Jew, can tell the child, Aiti Raya de Yisrael at Ushkol, come bring proof that you're Jewish, and then you can collect. Because if in fact my ox gores a non-Jew's ox, So our laws of damages would not apply in that case. So there would be no obligation to pay in a Jewish court. So that doesn't make sense. So it can't be there that we're treating him as Jewish, because we're effectively treating him as you have to prove that you're Jewish. So lo tricha denagke Torah didei l'Torah didan. So it's the situation is where the child's ox gores your ox, and so palge mishalim. So if that ox is a tam ox, is a non-muad ox, is not an ox that is known for goring, the rule in the Torah is that you have to pay half damages, because you didn't know that your ox was the kind of ox that likes to gore things. And so as a result, you didn't have to watch it so well. And we'll get to all of those kind of deals when we get to Seder Nezikin. But in the meantime, we'll note that that's the rule with respect to non-goring oxes that don't gore on a regular basis. And so, but that rule only applies to a Jew. If a non-Jew's ox gores your ox, we would, even if it's a tam, then even if it's one that is not known to gore, we would make the non-Jew liable. There's a sense of, the way I view it is that there's a sense of communal responsibility and risk sharing with respect to oxes that are not known to gore. But that communal sense of risk sharing only applies within the community. And so as a result, if a non-Jew who's not part of the community and doesn't pay into the benefits that are associated with being part of the community, then he doesn't get the benefit that's associated with being part of the community. Namely, he doesn't get to pay only half damages. But in this case, where the child's ox did the goring, we're going to allow him to pay only half damages, because the idach palga, because with respect to the other half, when the victim tried to collect the other half, amar lahu, he'll tell you the following: go prove that I'm really not Jewish, and then I'll give you the other half. So as a result, because of this concept of hamotzi mechavrero alav haraya, so as a result, in that situation, that's where Reish Lakish is explaining, when it's a 50-50 case, we will treat him as a Jew. So hadron alach besula nases, hadron alach besulas neses, hadron alach besulas nisis. So we are now finished with the first chapter of Maseches Ketubot, and God willing, tomorrow, stay tuned as we begin the second chapter. So looking forward to doing that with all of you, God willing, tomorrow. Yeah, no James today. God willing, hopefully, maybe he'll be able to show up tomorrow. All right. Have a wonderful day. Wonderful that we had you, Hanan. Be well.
Okay. So what time is going to rain, David?
I don't know.